The Ag Tribes Report is brought to you by Legacy Interviews, a video service that captures people as they really are, so the future knows who they really were. This Mother's Day, honor your parents with the opportunity to tell their stories and share the wisdom they've learned along the way. Welcome to the Ag Tribes Report, a breakdown of the top stories affecting the culture of agriculture, with your host, Vance Crowe. The report begins in 3, 2, 1. Let's begin.
Welcome to the Ag Tribes Report. I'm your host, Vance Crowe. Each week, I bring on a co-host to represent the perspectives of one of the many ag tribes that collectively make up U.S. and Canadian agriculture. This week, we are doing something a little bit different. We have Charles Benoit. Charles is a trade attorney and trade counsel for the Coalition for Prosperous America in D.C. He champions domestic producers and a protective tariff policy. He holds a BA from Western Ontario, representing our Canadian listeners, and a JD from Georgetown. He's advised the European Commission and worked with General Electric, representing businesses before federal courts and the U.S. Trade Commission. He is a vocal critic of globalist trade myths, and he is a respected expert in tariff policy. So, Charles, welcome to the Ag Tribes Report.
Thanks for having me, Vance.
Man, this is the time that you have been living for. This has to be the wildest time of all for somebody like you.
Yeah, so that's actually exactly right. I got into tariffs and trade, right out of law school. At Georgetown. If you want, there's only two cities in the world if you really want to get into trade policy. It's DC and Geneva. Those are the two cities to be in. And I found myself in DC at Georgetown with all the best people. And I mean, there is no interest in American law students. Like I was an American law student, JD, and all my classmates were actually for an LLM. An LLM is a one-year master's in law degree you can get, and it's popular with like foreigners to come over and like foreign lawyers, I should say, and do a one-year master's in law in American schools. And most of my students in my class, they'd actually worked for their foreign trade ministry, and they just came to Georgetown to do. So yeah, I mean, there was like me and two other American JD students, and it worked out great because I graduated peak Great Recession, 2010. And all my classmates in trade were all going back to their country. And so I was able to go directly from law school into GE at the height of the recession because I picked this niche. It was a very boring niche for a very long time, a very discouraging niche until things really turned around with President Trump. So you're exactly right.
I mean, and it is just a wild time. I mean, in every single college in the United States, it is taught that tariffs are bad. You want free trade, and that's what we've always been striving for. But free trade has always been filled with they have tariffs on our goods, but we don't have them when they bring them in. And so we've been living in this bizarro pseudo-free trade world for quite some time.
Yeah, that's exactly right. People have no idea about the history. The amount of gaslighting is, gaslighting being like just like telling people a fake story over and over again until like they're forced to believe it. It's actually insane. I'm very passionate about the history. People don't realize that nothing is new under the sun. And in fact, the historical analogy to where we are in 2025 is the 1816 to 1824 time period. That's exactly it. Back then we were very import reliant. We'd been up until the War of 1812. Well, Jefferson's Embargo Act, Napoleonic Wars, and then the War of 1812. We were a trading nation like we are now. We had relatively low tariffs, and it was Britain and France taking turns cutting us off from trade and forcing us to learn to be self-reliant. That was it. That kind of spawned the industrialization of the United States, and also the idea that we should protect our farmers from we got to feed ourselves. That's vitally important, and that kicked off after then, and we kind of rode that up. And it's just sort of like, imagine the planes flying, and it wasn't like a perfectly smooth cruise, but generally we were holding 30,000 feet of altitude, and then it came crashing down in 1913. Okay, that's when the income tax was invented. Woodrow Wilson and Cordell Hull, who's the father of the income tax, they prioritized international creditors, so they wiped out our tariffs in 1913. Farmers were destroyed. Okay, because what happened? It wiped out all our protective tariffs that protected our farmers. Now, World War I happened right after, obviously, right? So we didn't get the flood of imports. And Woodrow Wilson was telling farmers, this is great. We're going to feed the world. We're going to feed the world. You heard that line before, I bet, right? We're going to feed the world. Told all the farmers, leverage up, take on as much debt, do everything you can to increase output. We're going to feed the world. They didn't listen to the hard-learned lesson that, in fact, countries will only buy our food when they need it. They want to support their farmers too. Good for them, by the way. And so what happens? World War I ends. American farmers are more levered than they've ever been. All of a sudden, European agriculture comes roaring back. American farmers, all prices come crashing down. Farmers are wiped out, and they did not get to participate in the Roaring 20s. Your listeners should Google the Emergency Tariff Act of 1921. I wish our Republican Congress was had a tenth of the ambition of that Republican Congress. They, within 2 months of that congressional session starting, spring 1921, pardon me, or after the 20 election, all of the protective tariffs on agriculture were restored. We still had the problem that the farmers were over-levered and all this debt, but that happened. And for manufacturing, the protective tariffs were restored, and Republicans succeeded in wiping out the income tax for the bottom 98% of payers and replacing that with tariff revenue. And now everyone's going to say, "Oh, well, what's Smoot-Hawley?" Well, that's the mother of all gaslighting. I mean, the Smoot-Hawley had nothing to do with the Great Depression. Nothing. It was a very incremental tariff increase, right? So we went from total free trade to a protective tariff in 21 and 20, and then in 1922 they expanded it with the Ford-Macumber Act. So the 1920s, the Roaring 20s happened because of protective tariffs. Smoot-Hawley was a very incremental tariff increase at a time when imports were less than 5% of GDP, and so it had nothing to do. The Great Depression was a debt crisis and a monetary crisis. And don't take my word for it. Listen to Ben Bernanke, who's actually did his PhD in the subject. And but then 1934 was year zero. Okay, and that was the year Congress transferred its tariff authority to the president, and we've never recovered. And tariffs were pretty much wiped out. People think, oh, the 1950s were great. Not if you're a rancher, okay. Not if you were a fisherman. Not if you seafood. It's been a steady decline ever since then. Factories don't outsource overnight. It takes a few generations, but same thing. We've seen rural America wiped out. I used to live in Buffalo, like Rust Belt wiped out. It's all been a steady decline since that year zero.
Well, that is what we are going to talk about tonight, is the tariffs that are going on right now. It feels like we are in a revolutionary time, and people might look at the stock market and say that, but really it is so many other things are going to change as a result of this. So tonight we are going to talk about we're going to do a general overview of tariffs, and then we're going to talk about what cattle ranchers like R-Calf and then Bret Crosby and how they disagree on the effects of tariffs. And then we're also going to go through a post by Casey Kimbrell on why farmers, many of them, are pro-tariff. We're going to do that. We'll also do a little bit on Bitcoin this week. We're going to do Charles's Peter Thiel paradox, because that's sure to be good. And we're going to discuss his worthy adversary. And we're going to try and do that in just 30 minutes. So right now, the tariff situation, we are at Thursday, April 10th, and so much is moving. It's so quickly. You got to say what the date is, because, man, stuff is happening fast. U.S. farmers are reeling from tariffs, escalating global trade tension. China slapped an 84% tariff on American goods like soybeans and pork, slashing exports down from 30 million tons of soybeans to China to maybe just 2 million. The EU is also hitting back too, with 25% duties on U.S. poultry and nuts, and steel tariffs are jacking up tractor prices potentially by up to 20%. We're watching fertilizer prices go. But shockingly, egg prices are down, mostly because we are importing eggs. And there is so much going on that it's barely, it's hard to even know where to begin. When you look around at what the big news of the day is, Charles, what are you paying attention to?
So there's two things. Okay, tariffs have two purposes in the American tradition, and then a third, I would say, illegitimate purpose. Revenue and protection. Okay, so on the revenue side, it's very clear. The president campaigned on a 10% universal tariff, and we got that. And credit to him, he's keeping his promise. That should bring in 300 billion a year, maybe. That's a lot of. We're used to Congress spending, so maybe it doesn't sound like too much on the spending side, but on the revenue side, that's a lot. All corporate income tax is like 400 billion, so 300 billion in addition new revenue. That's a lot. For the bottom half of income tax payers submit about 50 billion. Okay, so we could we could already with that 300 billion, we can wipe out income tax for like the bottom 60, 70%, I don't know, 80% maybe. So that's the revenue side. Now on the protection side, and this is where like farmers and ranchers need to, and I know R-Calf is on top of this, but the protection side is happening via something called the Section 232 process. Section 232 is Section 232 of the Trade Expansion Act of 1962. And that authorizes the president to use increased tariffs for national security reasons. So that's, probably a lot of your customers are aware of the automotive tariff, right? The car tariff. And that's been done via 232. Similarly with steel and aluminum. We've got new actions been launched on copper and copper products, timber and wood products, lumber. So that's, and then automotive. There'll be more. Pharmaceuticals is coming next. Noticeably absent is agriculture so far. So that's kind of, I think this is good. So kudos to the administration. Revenue, they're doing the universal. I think 10% is a little light. I think they should work their way to 20. And then on the protection side, the way to do it, the way to set tariffs is product by product. So a lot of people thought, oh man, Benoit must be really disappointed and upset when the president canceled all those other country tariffs, the so-called reciprocal ones, which I guess happened 2 days ago. So no, not at all. Not at all. I don't
know, man. Like product by product is going to become like a giant sprawling bureaucracy and administrative, like people being able to go in and tinker at the. You don't think so?
No, Congress did it. Google, I encourage all your listeners, Google the Tariff Act of 1789.
Yeah, but 1789, the products
changed
that we're bringing in versus now. I mean,
nothing's changed. Nothing's changed.
Okay, tell me more.
Nothing's changed. So literally nothing has changed. Okay, there's nothing new under the sun in trade. Our tariff schedule today has 21 sections. Okay, 21. That's Roman numerals. Section 21 is works of art, so we can just put that aside. So sections 1 to 20 are pretty much like everything. It is everything. And sections 1 to 5 are agriculture. That's it. That's your universe. And it's an agriculture. Nothing has changed. I can tell you, if you want to give an example of how nothing has changed, the tariff on like pork and bacon was set in 1824 at 2 cents a pound. That remains the tariff today. Nothing has changed. Nothing has changed. It's a column 2. There was not really any inflation in the 19th century, so they didn't adjust it for inflation. And then, like I said, nothing's changed. So, and this was Congress doing it until 1930. Congress would set tariff rates like every decade and a half, we get a new tariff act. It's literally what the founders intended. Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution. And that's it. Just Congress listening to their consumers, listening to their producers, compromising, negotiating. There was no bureaucracy. There wasn't until Wilson, in the 1910s, created the Tariff Commission, which was a giant failure. But we don't even need a bureaucracy. It should be a direct conversation between our members of Congress and the constituents.
All right, let's take a look at the way that the cattle industry is weighed in. You mentioned R-Calf. So for those that don't know, R-Calf is kind of the renegade cattle organization that represents independent cattle ranchers. And today they came out and said in the last 9 years, total beef imports increased by 44% and beef prices increased by 40%. Meanwhile, the U.S. Census shows that the U.S. has lost another 107,000 beef cattle producers. And but this brought on a lot of controversy. The ag podcaster Matt Delgeshi replied, "You've had 6 years of herd liquidation and now the lowest herd since 1951. Imports have increased and beef prices are up due to this. It's drought forcing producers out of the game, not imports." And then Bret Crosby jumped in. He's a rancher from Wyoming saying, nope, tariffs are simply a tax that increase prices and reward inefficiency. What do you think of that?
Complete nonsense. I mean, it's literally everything but soybeans is down. Okay. Corn. Senator Grassley has been on Senate Finance for how many decades? And he's gotten everything he wanted. Okay. NAFTA, the Uruguay round, which that was it. I mean, that blew open agriculture. But then since then, I challenge people to go look at we've done 20 trade agreements since then. Sorry, 12 trade agreements with 20 countries. And for every one of those, look at the statements that were made at the time the trade agreement was gonna take place, and then just look at the reality. Just look at the export stats. Nothing's worked. Soybeans are the only thing that's up. So for corn, which I couldn't even believe it, but we export less corn now than we did 20 years ago by volume, not even by value. So we export less corn, everything. I'm in Florida.
But that's not because we want to, right? We would love to export more. Just people aren't buying it.
So the most famous speech in congressional history was March 1824. Henry Clay, he was the Speaker of the House. And what he launched was called the American System. Maybe a lot of listeners learned about that in school. It was a protective tariff, a central bank, and internal improvements, infrastructure. That speech, he went through every single crop to show that, over a 20-year period, he compared like 1800 to 1824, that there's some good export years, but countries will only buy from us what they absolutely need. And that's right. And nothing has changed. So we might have some good export years, but countries shut it down as soon as they can. And Senator Cantwell, she, from Washington State, the Democrat, I mean, she's another one, along with Grassley, who's championed free trade more than anybody. And, she champions apples, wheat, cherries, and potatoes. And we export less than we did in 1995, despite all of these new trade agreements that they said would bring big success. So look, the lesson is you don't chase exports. By the way, our population has grown 29% in that period. Okay, our GDP is actually up almost 300%, but whatever GDP, that's tech. But our population has grown by 29%, and we're exporting less food. Like what's in the world population has grown by even more. So it doesn't make any sense.
Well, this kind of leads right into something that Casey Kimbrell, who's a great follow on X, what he thinks happened in ag. On this blistering post, he got above a journalist on X that had posted some things about agriculture. And I'm just going to read this because I think it's worthwhile. He says, your bio says you write about things related to agriculture, yet one would have to be extremely out of touch not to understand that cheating trade partners have done to American agriculture. Those selling this type of trade promise prosperity, yet decade after decade of American ag has declined. Yeah. Chinese cotton mills decimated our domestic milling industry with the promise of buying our production, yet that never came. We were promised open markets for beef imports, but that exceeded our exports. Once vibrant vegetable farms and packing sheds across the country are just a memory, slain by cheap imports grown with scant labor and chemical regulations. He goes on and on. It's an excellent post. He's reflecting, oh, sorry, I thought I posted what he wrote. He's just reflecting what I think a lot of people are saying. And Casey, would you say you agree with him? Is he right about ag being sold out right now?
Ag is 100% sold out, but also misled by all their representatives for the most part. I mean, I wish there was more groups like R-Calf. I'll say, so I agree with him, except we got to stop using language like cheating, that it implies that in fact there's some great rule book that if we all just followed the rules, everything would be great. No, there's no rule book. There's no level playing field. These are all mirages. Okay. We just have to focus what Henry Clay said, protect the home market. Don't worry about cheating. Don't talk about level playing field. And if anyone is talking to you about, we need to fight harder for exports, it's a gaslighting. Okay. What they're doing is, those people are processors. They want the cheapest input costs possible. They don't want to pay. They don't want you to be prosperous. They don't want you to have pass your farm on to your children. They don't want any of these things. They're flipping it. If we fight harder, what do we get? More market access commitments work both ways, more ability to, instead of having to pay a shrimper in Louisiana, we'll just use literal slaves, off the Chinese coast, literal slaves to get the shrimp. That's their game. So don't let anybody talk to you about we're going to get more exports or we're going to fight for the American farmer. No, we don't fight. Oh, and by the way, the gaslighting, I don't want to call you out, Vance, but this is like every time you hear because you're in good company, the president's been fooled too. Talking about Canadian dairy. Like if you listen to a Ways and Means or Senate Finance Committee hearing, you would think America had two existential enemies: the Chinese Communist Party and Canadian dairy farmers. We have an export surplus with dairy. It's one of the handful. Okay. We run a trade deficit in almost every agricultural crop, but we actually export. And the reason they hate Canadian dairy so much, I don't talk about the national milk processors, but the reason they hate that is because they have rejected globalization. When NAFTA was renegotiated into USMCA, Canada, to protect their dairy farmers, promised the United States that we wouldn't even export, Canada wouldn't export dairy to third countries. Okay, that's how hard they went. We just want to protect our home market, but that's the right attitude. Protect your farmers, feed yourselves, feed your nation, and don't chase exports. So,
would you think this? Would you have this philosophy if there weren't tariffs by other people? If there were zero tariffs across, do you believe that the world is better off when we do trade?
No. It just doesn't you need a home market. So Hawaii is a great example, right? We actually, we had a free trade agreement with Hawaii for 30 years before we ended up overthrowing their government and annexing them. And that actually happened. I don't know. This is Congress words. I'm quoting.
You're
Congress.
Awesome, Charles. Keep going. This is great.
Okay. Well, look, yeah. So I mean, Hawaii is like that's the one thing where was there ever a good trade agreement in U.S. history? Well, no is the answer. The best one you could maybe point to was the trade agreement with Hawaii. We did that in 1875, and we threw who suffered? Louisiana, people like Louisiana and Florida sugarcane farmers and Western sugar beet farmers suffered. Sugar imports from Hawaii increased 1,400%. And so you're like, okay, well, was that good? I don't know. We had a substantial sugar tariff, and it was 2 cents a pound, 64 cents a pound today, if we still had it. Well, we actually do. Sugar's the last man standing, by the way. There's so much I could say. I could talk about sugar for an hour. But look, Hawaii, we didn't even get it done there. We sacrificed Western sugar beet farmers for San Francisco sugar refiners. And then it was actually, that was 1875. Fast forward to 1890, McKinley wants to raise tariffs on manufactured goods. He's then chairman of Ways and Means. He's under so much pressure. We got to cut some other tariff. So what happened? He just cut the tariff on sugar to zero, which destroyed Hawaii. And we started getting all of our sugar from Cuba overnight. Then the sugar planters overthrew the Queen, and with they had with some U.S. military support. So it's not even like the trade agreement we had with Hawaii led to them being annexed. If anything, it might have stalled annexation by a couple decades. Now we got Hawaii in the Union. That's great. And Hawaii was an agricultural powerhouse. We supplied like 80% of the world's canned pineapple. But unfortunately, that's all been lost. Bananas, you name it, to free trade as well. I don't know that Native Hawaiians are any better for it.
I think my deep pushback against this, the thing that I don't like, is that it gives too much power to politicians to pick winners and losers. If you have this tariff, it gives them the ability to say, hey, we're going to make this easier on some people and harder on others, or I don't know. It doesn't feel like it's freedom encouraging.
This is a really important point. Really important point. So the way tariffs, you might hear the term mercantilism. The way tariffs have been used by literally every other country in the world is to build national champions, an anti-competitive. We hate that. Free market competition is the most important thing. I'm a conservative. If you don't have free market competition, you have to have that. It's never been, using tariffs to protect a monopoly has never been the American tradition. It was the founders. We do want a big internal free trade. So under the Articles of Confederation, every state had its own tariff policy. The founders knew that didn't work. We needed a larger internal home market with free trade. The same way Holy Roman Empire, like it was a million little customs territories. You had to constantly pay duties. That doesn't work. You do need free market competition, absolutely, but you just need it under one sovereign, right? So when in another little, we had a free trade agreement with Canada in 1854. In 1866, we tore it up, and because it was really bad for America and American farmers in particular, and in the main lumber industry. And the Canadian provinces were all like they weren't a country yet. Sorry, the British provinces that were then, but they merged. So yeah, if provinces want to merge, or if like you want to make a customs union, like what they did in Europe, that's a different thing, because there you've got one entity that can set the rules of the market. But to go back to ranchers, like, yeah, we all love Australia and New Zealand, like high wage countries or whatever, right? But well, they authorize compound 1080 and we don't. There's always going to be something like that. So it doesn't work. It doesn't work having just going to zero tariffs and saying, we'll let the chips fall where they may. That does not work.
Man, you have been sitting outside of the Overton window for your entire career. And just in the last 2 weeks, you've gone from radical to policy. That's like a giant jump, because I mean, the things that you're saying fly in the face of, if anyone took a college level economics class, probably even a high school level economics class, this is in total defiance of what the entire country has been taught for, certainly my entire lifetime.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's modern economics is just astrology. It's just nonsense. But just go to history. Just go to what worked. I don't know what to say other than that. Google the Tariff Act of 1824. Look at all those prices, or Google the tariff. Go more recent. Google the Tariff Act of 1922. Look at all those tariffs, these are readable documents. You don't need to be a lawyer or an economist or anything. You can read it and be like, oh wow, yeah, that really worked out well.
So we have blown through the regular rigmarole that we do on the Ag Tribes Report, but I thought maybe I would ask you a real quick question about Bitcoin. Where are you at on Bitcoin? Gold has been surging into the United States, but there are no tariffs on Bitcoin. Hard to do that.
No, yeah, we don't. Nothing that's digital is tariffed. Tariff is only tangible things that show up in a port. Well, and electricity. Electricity can be tariffed, but that's it.
And thoughts on Bitcoin? Do you think this will this kind of tariff trade? I mean, we're hearing now big rumors of Russia and China are now starting to settle some of their oil, their energy deals in Bitcoin. Any thoughts on this?
Look, a lot of people I really respect are very into it. To me, I think I find Dave Ramsey's line very persuasive, right? It's just like the sovereign's always going to set the currency. When Iraq fell and they create a new currency, people accept it. So, for me, for Bitcoin to take over, to be a big thing, you would have to have total sovereign collapse. And at that point, I'm like, well, I'd rather invest my money right now in a chicken coop, if that makes any sense, than but I don't know.
I'm not so sure you need total sovereign collapse. I think there are a lot of values that come out of Bitcoin, but I take your point. Moving on to because I'm super curious, the Peter Thiel paradox. What is one thing that you believe that almost no one agrees with you on, which has got to be basically your entire philosophy?
Well, yeah, exactly. I mean, I think look, the president agrees with me on tariffs, so that's pretty good. But historically, I guess, the economics is astrology. It's just all these models. It's just complete mumbo jumbo. What I see is the data that feeds economics is almost everywhere I look is garbage. Not volumes, but once you get into values and you're talking about, oh well, look, the value of something. Value is just whatever. It's so.
I'm going to give you a straight up, I don't know, probably the highest one I've ever given, like a 9.8 here, but not for your particular one that you said here. But I will say that your thoughts on inside of a country, you should have free trade, but outside of a country, you should be setting those. I actually need to sit down and really think about what I believe. There are some core things that I naturally think, but you've called into question something that I thought was natural. So, I mean, bravo. That's the highest score I've ever given.
Globalization drives consolidation. Okay, so you can't have a global antitrust policy. Antitrust has been very important to farmers and ranchers historically. So, there's another one. Globalization drives consolidation. Everyone says, oh, globalization, that's more competition. No, the opposite. If you want to preserve a competitive market, you have to do it within a sovereign. People are free to come invest here. If you can build a better widget, we want you. And that's uniquely American. Lesser countries restricted investment and said, no, we're building a national champion. America's always said, you can build a better widget, come and build it. So that's American exceptionalism.
This is absolutely brilliant. All right. And then the final section, the worthy adversary. Who is somebody that you respect but strongly disagree with? California
Governor Gavin Newsom. That guy is so, I admire competence. That guy is so awesome. I enjoy listening to him speak, even as I, totally disagree with him. And I so enjoy listening to him speak. I couldn't even be mad he's president, even though I'd never vote for him.
That's a very good one. I've known a couple con men in my life, and they have they have a slickness to them, right? Like a willingness to say whatever they need to say. And I don't think I'm ever going to wrap my mind around that. Plus, I was living out in California when he got busted for sleeping with his campaign manager's wife, and his campaign manager was his best friend, and that just kind of disappeared. And you're like, how could you ever trust somebody that would do that?
But I admire his competence, his ambition, and he's got this new podcast now. Whereas I can't tell you how contemptuous I am of your typical Republican legislator. Okay, they're just like, oh shucks, they're lazy. They're so lazy, and just phoning it in, no vision, no whatever, just happy to have their little sinecure. And then I see someone like Gavin hustling so hard. So I guess that's why I'm just I can respect a very capable and skilled politician.
Well, Charles, I made a terrible mistake having you on the Ag Tribes Report. I should have waited just another day so you and I could have a long form podcast. So I hope you will come back on.
Yeah,
again.
Definitely. I'd love that. It'd be fun.
If people wanted to know more about the way you think about things, or they think, hey, that's a guy that I want representing my trade interests, where should they go to find out more?
Yeah, so check out prosperousamerica.org. That's that's our website. But so that's a great way. Or reach out to me on X. It's Charles_Benoit Benoit.
Well, thank you so much for coming on, Charles. All right, so Mother's Day is just 4 weeks away, and if you've been thinking about getting your mother a gift, I can tell you from my own experience, calling up my mother and saying I was going to pack up all the equipment and go up there to do a legacy interview. You will find no better gift. A legacy interview is where I sit down with your loved ones. We do it online or in person here in our studios, and we record their life stories, talking about the things that mattered to them throughout their lives, the experiences that they had, and the lessons that they learned. And then after you're done with that interview, you can play it while watching it with your parents and their grandchildren. And we get photos of people watching those interviews with their family members, and it is a truly profound thing. So if you're interested to learn more, go to legacyinterviews.com to find out more. All right, we will be back next week. I've actually been getting hit up by some people that run some checkoff organizations that want to say, hey, we want to come in and talk about our perspectives, and I look forward to doing that. So, all right, as always, feel free to disagree.